Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey, we'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. Each week, we'll come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters. Growth and progress, not perfection. All while developing positive habits for you to utilize in your life. To learn more, please visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive Positive Recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Good day, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another installment of Positive Recovery MD's podcast with Dr. Jason Powers and your other co-host, Julie DeNova.
Hey, hey.
And today we have a very interesting guest. She gives the word or the phrase poker face a new meaning. She's also crossed paths with at least one of us years before in our previous lives. She is in private practice. She's an LPC. So she's a counselor. She's in private practice. She specializes in high functioning resource professionals. So if I fell, that's who I would use maybe, because I like to think of myself as a high functioning resource professional. She also helps the greatest of us, the first responders, also helps business owners who have or wonder if they have a substance abuse disorder, as well as helping their families. She holds a position in a small private secular school, and she wears a lot of hats. So she's assistant principal, school counselor. She teaches AP English, sociology, psychology. So basically I can ask you just about anything. You're a Renaissance woman. But I think the coolest thing is that she was at the final table. Where is that?
The World Series of Poker, and she cashed in.
Yes, she cashed in the Women's World Series of Poker main event, which is crazy good. I mean, how many people entered that?
That particular event was over 1,000 people, 1,000 women.
That's crazy. It's so hard to just beat one person. I mean, it really is. So anyway, yeah. Hey, welcome.
Thank you.
So glad that you could join us.
Glad to be here.
So if you would, let our listeners know a little bit about what it was like for you, what happened, what's it like now, and anything else you want to talk about.
Sure. I guess I'll start with my personal story and then follow that into my professional story. Ultimately, I am my ideal client. I was a high-functioning alcoholic myself, although I would not have described part of that. You know, I walked across the stage for my undergraduate degrees. I earned 2 degrees rather quickly in the span of time that most people would earn one. Grabbed both of those, and I had used drugs and alcohol every day for those 4 years. Didn't occur to me that I could have a problem and have that kind of resume. Graduated college, stopped using the dry goods. You know, the wet goods increased to compensate for that.
But no more side dishes, right? Just main course.
That's right. And what happened for me is that there was a gap that started to occur, that my potential and my real life started to slip, that the gap widened. What I could do and what I was realizing began to widen. And ultimately, that ended up in a small little legal problem, and I had to sit in front of my parents and beg for mercy and assistance with a check for an attorney. The problem with that, there were a lot of problems with that, but one of the major problems with that was that my mother had 20-something years of sobriety at the time. She got sober when I was 2. And she said, okay, yeah, so I'll write you a check for an attorney, but you need to promise to go to 1 AA meeting a week for the next 3 months. She had the wisdom to know that if she told me to go to more for longer, I would have rebelled. I probably had the maturity of a teenager, and especially in that regard at the time. I was 25. And so I acted like a teenager. I'm pretty sure I literally put my hands on my hips and I said, whatever, drinking is your problem, not mine. Of course, I said that as a woman who had just gotten a DUI to a woman who had been sober for a couple of decades, and took the check and eventually did go to my first AA meeting and stayed sober.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have had the absolute joy and blessing of going through, most seasons of adult life completely sober. I went through my 20s, half my 20s anyway, sober. And in your 20s, you don't want to be patronized from an age standpoint. You want to be taken seriously. And I got to the rooms and everyone, oh, you're so young. And I didn't want to be so young, and I felt like I needed to defend my seat.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's common for all 20-year-olds to have that same issue. But as you get older, you realize that people in their 20s, they excel at looking good, but that's it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, they're beautiful. It's like you're at your peak, but
yeah. Looking back, it's hard to distinguish what was early sobriety and what was going through your 20s.
Another thing is really interesting is that I know how the rooms work. I mean, that saved my life as well. And if I'm sure they were not happy. They don't encourage you to only go to one meeting a week, right? Right. So you've been sober since that first experience. When did the epiphany happen where you realized that was for you? That was the solution?
Pretty early on. It was May of 1991. I breathed a sigh of relief and realized this is home. When I tell my story in the rooms or whatever, I make a joke because humor is one of my coping skills. I make a joke that I put down Barbies and picked up Boone's Farm, right? And I didn't know how bad I felt physically, psychologically, emotionally until I didn't feel that way.
Right.
Until the alcohol was removed, till the patterns of thinking and behavior were removed. Because I did not have preteen or teenage years in which there was any
consequences,
consequences or psychological health, and so I didn't know that it was not normal to feel as poorly as I did. I just felt that that's how people felt. Right. And so to not feel that way was it was an epiphany. It was a lightening. It was the spiritual awakening that I could achieve at that level.
Right, and that's why we always say, like, you don't need to be willing. You just need to show up.
Which I now understand as a professional to be science.
Right. What can I ask
for our listeners? Can I just ask you to dig into that a little bit, because I think that's a really good point. So I'd like to dig into that or drill down a little further.
Sure. So that bounces me, many years later, because I did not become a professional immediately. I became a professional with double-digit sobriety. I wasn't, somebody who immediately wanted to save the world and be paid for it. So as a professional, what I have developed in terms of my theory and approach is a very inclusive pathway to sobriety, which means there's many ways to get there. In 91, I chose the way I chose. But today for my clients and peers and, anybody who ever asks me, there's a lot of ways of thinking and behavior and habits we can develop that are neuro beneficial, that recircuit and rewire the brain in ways that are counter to the development of the circuitry that supports a substance use disorder. And so
I saw that you use some positive psychology. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge foundation for what we do.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I know that. Yeah. I'm writing your stuff into my doctorate project. So
awesome. Yeah. It's all yours. It's all yours.
Yeah.
Was one of your degrees in mathematics or something?
No, I have. So my degrees are an undergraduate degree in English with honors, a degree in business, a master's degree in counseling, and I'm currently trying to complete a degree in doctorate of professional counseling.
So you don't find a lot of that, I guess, pedigree at the poker tables because you have to computate, right? I mean, you have to know what the odds are for what everybody else is showing and what you have. And I just assumed you were either a mathematician or an engineer or statistician or something.
So some of the poker decisions are absolutely based on math and common statistics. There's a layperson assumption that it's all reading people and bluffs, and it's more understanding patterns, which is psychology, of course. Right. Being able to read patterns and understanding people's pattern of behavior, pattern of betting, but my specialty is tournament poker, which is different than cash. It's a different strategy. And all right, so cash is when you walk into a casino and you give them, let's say, $500, and they give you $500 worth of chips that are literally, if you cash that back out, you would get $500.
Right.
If you play a tournament, for example, the one I cashed in last year, it was $1,000 tournament. I gave them $1,000. They gave me a stack of chips that was essentially worthless because if I cash that, you can't cash that back in. And you play those chips strategically. They have denominations on them, but that doesn't mean anything other than to bet, I bet 300. And you then play in a manner that if your chips are eliminated, you are eliminated from the tournament. You can't reach into your pocket and buy additional chips. You can't buy back in. It's an elimination program down to the end. It's a different strategy. It's almost a different game, although the structure around the table and the cards and how it's played is the same.
So at first, you probably want to hang around. Like the goal is not to lose your chips more than it is to knock somebody out right away.
Well, yes, as long as you are also accumulating enough chips to stay ahead of the blinds. I don't know if you've ever played, but you always have to ante up with blinds.
Right.
So you need to be accumulating at least enough that they're not
whittling away at your pot. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they keep going up. Whereas in cash, they do not.
Right,
they stay the same.
So two things. One is I heard like if you play cash, you go to a casino and you play, and you don't know who the patsy is at the table, you're it.
Yeah, that is a common saying.
Is it true?
I would say yes.
So there's enough local people that play that it's not really in your favor to just go sit at a table as a stranger and play. Okay.
It is not. There is a lot of dynamics underneath and going on, particularly with the locals, because they develop some communication and some skills. Yeah.
Like anything else in life. And then second is, you didn't share this, so I don't know if you grew up in a home of alcoholism or addiction, but those of us who did sort of developed this innate ability to read emotions, because that, if you could predict, that was the only control you had as a kid. So you start to read people pretty well. Mm-hmm. And so I do decent when I play. I don't like to gamble, but I guess I'm decent at it because I can read people, and that's where the psychology comes in. But I have played in a couple of charity tournaments, and that doesn't get me as far as figuring out the math.
Right.
I mean, you do need that, but it's impossible. I mean, at some level, like if you don't know the math, you're not going to be a good player, right?
Right. Over the long term, what is said about poker, not about other casino type games, is luck can it can make you a fortune in a minute, but over the long term, skill prevails at least in poker. I don't gamble, and I'm kind of a unicorn in that setting. I don't do any other table games. I don't do any other bets. I don't do sports betting. I don't do slot machines. I don't do anything else. So when I am in Vegas, I'm either at a poker tournament or in my room reading a self-development book. I mean,
how do you practice? How does somebody practice that? If there's no real casinos here.
Now there are legal poker rooms, although I don't go to those. But there are a significant amount of people interested in tournament poker. So there's a lot of peer groups, and we have home games with about, not anymore, but until 2020, 40 to 50 people would get together about once a month and have a tournament for about anywhere between $60 and $100 a buy-in. And that's how I would practice.
I was not aware that's legal. Is there like a limit
for
on
a home game? It is, as long as the host is not taking any money from.
Wow. Did not know that. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to go to the seedy rooms at 2 a.m. with a special knock.
They had those also before they had the legal rooms, but I also did not go to those. I have a few licenses in the state of Texas that I'm a little protective of, so I stayed away. Yeah. To answer your other question about growing up in a home, my sisters are 11 and 12 years older than me, and there's no people in between us. And we have a joke in our family, again, humor is my coping skill, that they grew up with the drunk mom and I grew up with the depressed one. Because as I think I shared, she got sober and stayed sober when I was 2. And so that, in the 70s, we did not have enough information and support to identify co-occurring. So she sobered up and stayed sober until her death about 17 years ago, but she did not identify and address the depression. So I did become quite aware of things. And then my dad actually did develop a gambling problem. So that had its own thing for sure.
So that didn't scare you. How did you get into poker? How did you know you were good at it?
So after my marriage to I have 3 now grown children. After my marriage to their dad collapsed, I had a brief and rebound marriage. But while that was in the dating phase, he played free poker. There were at the time a lot of free poker leagues going on in Texas where you would go to a bar and you would play poker for free. The bar would host it because the people would stay there forever and drink, and you would play and accumulate points, and then you could play in larger tournaments and get prizes. And that man would play free poker. And so while we were dating, I would watch, and that was boring, and I didn't drink. So that was really boring to watch people play poker and drink. And I was sober and I didn't play. So I learned how to play poker. I ditched the marriage and kept the poker.
And how quickly did you realize that you were actually talented?
Pretty quickly, because that was in about 2006. And I think it was 2009 that I made the first final table.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was in New Orleans on a women's, it was a World Series of Poker circuit event.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to ask you some questions. Just tell me what pops in your head. So
sure.
What's your favorite word?
Oh, Zen and peace came to mind.
Okay. What is your least favorite word?
I don't know if this is accurate, but right now I'm really tired of hearing the word unprecedented.
Okay. You watching a lot of news? What is your favorite food?
Steak.
Least favorite food?
Oh, I don't know that I have a least favorite. I have a pretty wide palate, and my body shows that too. But I don't like heavily heated spice because I just can't tolerate it.
Okay.
I'm a wuss.
No, I'm with you. What profession, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, would you love to have a stab at?
Politics.
Oh, you're going to hear unprecedented a lot then in that life. What profession would you loathe doing?
That's hard to say. The summer before I went to graduate school for my master's, I was in a very low point, and I accepted a job to clean an office building. It was done at night. The office building included a couple of professional offices. It also included a hair salon and a nail salon. And I am completely and totally aware and respectful, and I understand that somebody needs to clean office buildings.
Okay. But you don't want to be a janitor. Right?
I cried every night. It was probably a combination of the space I was in my life, but also feeling like my talents and abilities were completely underutilized. But I actually used a positive intervention to get through that I'd love to share. I realized that I needed that job. It was $600 a month. And at that time, $600 a month was everything. And it really wasn't that long ago. But I was in a spot that I had no choice. So the only choice I had was what I kept in my head. So I could cry every night, or I could put something else in my head. And I thought, the people who work here would not know me if I was standing next to them at Kroger, but I could in their workstations at their, the station where they did nails, the station where they did hair, their desk, their cubicle. I could think of them and think of love and light and happiness and joy. And I could look at their pictures, and I could look at their knickknacks, and I could look at their workstation, and I can just fill that space with as much positive energy as I could muster for them, and try to be a good vibe, to use, 70s terms.
Job crafting.
Yeah.
Job crafting. Yeah. Kind of reorganize what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah.
It makes the doing it a little more pleasant.
It really did.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So what things turn you on in terms of like things that you're passionate about or get your blood going, positive things? What turns you on is the question James always asks. So
in my school role, when I teach, well, I guess any of the subjects, when I teach them, when I see a student get a big idea, when I see a student who in one of my English classes reads a classic and they understand why it's important to read a classic, because it encapsulates something important from history or culture, or that idea from 1984, the book 1980, why it's important now. Or when they learn something in sociology and they see something new that their life and worldview, in a private school in Katy, Texas, would not have exposed them to. When they get energized by something new and their world gets expanded. Or in the therapy room, when that happens to a client, when they are empowered with something that gives them energy or an idea or another avenue, or when somebody else's life is expanded, that gives me energy for sure.
Awesome. What turns you off?
Reflexive responses that show lack of thinking or critical thinking, just where people adopt a automatic response that they haven't taken any pause to think, maybe I need to revisit that. Maybe it's time to change that a little.
Gotcha. Like automatons.
Yeah.
So let's assume there's a God. When you die, you're at the pearly gates. What would you like to hear God say to you?
Thank you for helping my people.
Nice.
That's nice. I loved hearing that. And that really kind of just sums up, I think, who you are as a person. And Dr. Powers said it early on in the podcast, that you are a Renaissance woman. And I do believe that you have so many skills and so many talents. And it's quite obvious in the various ways that you're helping people. And so I'm grateful to have known you for several years now. And you're right, I did teach you a CPR class. So
you did.
I helped you save lives in another way too, maybe. I don't know. We're going to jump right into our positive intervention.
Okay.
At Positive Recovery Centers, we do use a lot of our positive interventions out of the daily guide, which we'll be sending you your very own copy.
Good, because I actually loaned my last copy to somebody, and you know what happens when you loan out of that office is you never get it back. Right. So I am without a copy at the moment.
Soon. Yeah, this is great. So we are going to open with a quote from Harry Emerson Fosdick. Rebellion against your handicaps gets you nowhere. Self-pity gets you nowhere. One must have the adventurous daring to accept oneself as a bundle of possibilities and undertake the most interesting game in the world, making the most of one's best. As my good friend Dave Wright always says, there's the way things are, and then there's the way things are. What he points out here is that there is reality, and then there is the unreality made of wishful thinking, mental anguish, and suffering. Acceptance is the first step to a life free from addiction. It's also the virtue necessary to transform trauma into growth. Simply stated, acceptance can help you make the most of any situation. Despite any imperfections, you have strengths, and you are the only one who can choose to embrace and nurture the best of what you have inside. Accept yourself for where you excel and put in the work necessary to capitalize on your strengths. So for today's positive intervention, you are asked to reflect on the concept of yourself as a bundle of possibilities. Journal about the 3 to 5 strengths or innate characteristics you see working in your favor in your current phase of life. Keep those strengths in mind throughout the day. Remind yourself to apply them to any challenges or choices, and then journal tonight on the forum. So for us, it was just journaling. So how was that positive intervention for you? And what were the bundle of kind of possibilities that you were jotting down?
Oh, I love that. I was reminded of a couple of things. One was a few years ago, I was T-boned and in a near fatal car accident. And I chose, as the consequences of that continued, to accept the limits of my insurance and the limits of his insurance. And when I did that, all my money went to my attorney and to the medical, because I was not medically insured at the time. But I made the decision, there's part of that reading that you said that talked about making the most of within your thought process. But I made the decision that I was not going to revisit that decision with anger and bitterness, and I should have taken him to court, and I should have, gotten him and his insurance company for all sorts of money. And I am so glad I didn't just passively accept the money, but I took it one level beyond that and consciously made the decision to not revisit that decision with anger and angst and regret, because it allowed me to wrap up that season and move on in a way that I would not have been able to. It was in a way a bundle of possibilities in a bundle of what could be looked at as a horrible circumstance, for sure. That's one of the things that intervention reminded me of. Talk about acceptance, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Powers, did you have an opportunity to take a look at this one?
Yeah, for me, I've had to use, or I've had the opportunity to use prudence and perspective and humor to sort of navigate through the COVID epidemic. And, as a physician, I'm really reluctant to express certain opinions about that virus and what's going on, especially in a historical context, because I definitely don't want to be perceived as, let's say, taking this too cavalier or being too alarmist or whatever. People aren't going to be happy. But as a professional and the chief medical officer, being able to adopt the most prudent plan is sometimes very inconvenient, and it may not be what feels right, but it definitely is backed by what the CDC says. So I for sure care about other people's health, well-being, and just making everybody else safe. So just like you, I could have gone down the road of being, I guess, bitter about the recommendations and all that type of thing that just makes life very tough, or just being prudent and choosing the healthiest option.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of repeat for our listeners, acceptance is the first step to a life free from addiction. It's also the virtue necessary to transform trauma into growth. And so when we are reflecting on these bundles of possibilities and getting into a place of acceptance, when you really rely heavily on your strengths, it can move you in a very transformative way. It can also help you get into a place of acceptance quicker. But who's keeping time? I'm not keeping time on what you're going through, Dr. Powers, or what you went through, Joanne. But in my own life, when I did this exercise right now, I'm using a tremendous amount of gratitude. I am using a tremendous amount of kindness, and I am using a tremendous amount of love. And so I'm hoping through using those that I can get to the other side of my transition where I am in a place of better self-acceptance. And I'm right in the middle of it. So I'm being super vulnerable for our listeners. But I'm finding that, just doing these positive interventions, because I do them every day, helps me get to that place of acceptance and helps me to look at life through a different lens. And so I'm grateful just for being on Positive Recovery MD, because I got to share this positive intervention with all of our listeners and share a little bit of Joanne and Dr. Powers with you all today. So thank you, Joanne, so much for being on Positive Recovery MD. If someone wanted to reach out to you, how would they do so?
Sure. So I have a website with a fantastic blog if you'd like to read some of my ramblings about recovery, and that's at joanneketch.com. I also have a professional Facebook, which if you search, it'll come up with all of the initials afterwards. And so those are the two easiest places. I have some other social media, but I don't keep up with those, so I'm not going to mention them. And those are the easiest ways.
Great. And for our listeners, we'll put that in the caption, the joanneketch.com, because Ketch is spelled Ketch.
It is, like ketchup, which I heard my entire junior high experience. Yeah.
Well, if you went to school with me, you would have heard fetch.
That's so funny. Well, thanks again.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
You got it. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us. We really appreciate it. Flourish in recovery, flourish in life, flourish in work. Have a blessed day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to get your daily positive intervention sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4-SOBRIETY, which is 877-476-2727. 2743. We are here to help.